And we are live.
Hi, welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. This is the second webinar in our September series titled Embracing Video Games for Interest-Powered Learning. I'm Paula Esquadra. I'm the Digital Marketing and Communications Manager for GlassLab, and I'll be your host for today. Throughout this month on Connected Learning TV, we'll be diving into deep conversations about leveraging video games for high-impact learning. So we'll be chatting today about the skepticism surrounding video games for learning and how to address all of those critiques. But before we dive into our chat, we have a couple of quick details. To those watching live right now, we welcome your comments and questions via the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning or via the Google Plus event page. We'll do our best to address your questions here in the Google Hangout. We're also chatting throughout the month on the Connected Learning Google Plus community site, and using the same Connected Learning hashtag, so give us a shout out in case there's anything you'd like to chat about. I'd like to give our guests a chance today to briefly introduce themselves before we dive in. So Michael John, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Michael John, or usually called MJ, and I'm the game director at GlassLab.
Cool. And what brought you to the video game learning space?
I've been making video games for about, I want to say it's about 23, 24 years now, commercially, and then just the last couple of years got some opportunities through GlassLab to build commercial or learning video games, and it just kind of was that offer you can't refuse. It was such a cool challenge, and not looking back.
Very cool. Liz Klein, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Liz Klein. I'm product manager at GlassLab. And I got interested in this space. I'm a former elementary school educator, and then after that I worked in publishing, educational publishing, and ed tech, and I was looking for something different and something that really was a way to captivate and engage students. And so I found learning games as a place for innovation, and so it just totally fascinated me, and here I am at GlassLab working side by side with MJ.
Great to have you here. Randall, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm glad to join you, GlassLabbers. I guess Tim and I are the only non-GlassLabbers here. I am the director of Game Train Learning. We're an educational nonprofit organization. Our mission is to broadly promote game-based learning in schools. So our big focus is how to train teachers in using game-based learning activities and game thinking in their classes. So we do PD workshops and curriculum development. So that's me.
Pleasure to have you here. And Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Young. I work with John at CLA and on the Pursuitery.com project, which is about connecting interest to opportunity. And this past summer, we ran a really fun and successful Camp Minecraft program. Previously, I've done research on StarCraft and competitive games.
Very cool. I suppose let's dive in. So for a long time, video games haven't typically been associated with learning and education, but they're now being seen as a valuable resource that's being explored as something comparable to a book or a lecture and so on and so forth. What makes games fun in the classroom? What can they offer us, and what have you seen? Liz, would you like to go first?
So one of the things that I think makes games so well suited for learning is just that it is a medium that students are super comfortable with because they're using it in their personal time, and it is the way in which they're engaging with the world already. And so why not capture and harness that inherent engagement that games have to offer and use it to help engage students in the classroom. Another thing that I think is so special about digital games is just that there are things that you can do in digital games that are difficult to do with traditional teaching methods. Such things as ways at getting at persistence, ways about embracing failure and using it to fuel further learning. And these habits of persistence and grit are things that students are doing in, when they're playing games for fun, but these are also essential skills for academic success. And so using learning games as a tool for that is just one of the myriad things that makes games for learning so special.
Randall, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay. I have a lot of thoughts on this. It's kind of a broad question, but I'll do my best. I think, I guess maybe backing up a step, games as a medium. There's been articles written about, games are just another medium, like books or video or something else that are at the teacher's disposal. And if you could think about, say, games didn't exist, and you can think about what medium could we create that would be the ideal learning medium for kids these days. And you would think maybe, well, probably wouldn't be a book because it's very passive. It's very one way. It's not as active, so you don't get engrossed or immersed in it as much as a game. It doesn't provide you constant feedback. Well, I guess it kind of does, but you have to skip ahead chapters maybe. But in games, you're getting constant feedback. So ideally, it's a medium where it presents you with challenges that are very motivating, and as you're tackling those challenges, it's giving you feedback each and every second, pretty much. So in that way, it's a tremendous learning medium, and very different from the others that we have today. So I think our talk about games today, and the skeptics that think that games aren't a good learning medium, they're probably the best learning medium we have if our lessons are designed right around them.
Thanks, Randall. I was just thinking about this actually this morning, and we talk at GlassLab a lot about this because we're half of our group comes from the world of games and half of it doesn't, and so we get a lot of really interesting conversations. And when you think about the different types of media that are out there, so let's say books, film, whatever it may be, and that the dominant way that those provide us understanding is through sort of stories or sequential understanding. Games do something very different, which is that the dominant way of providing understanding is through systems, is through the understanding of like rule sets that interact with each other, and how when someone interacts with those, how does the system change, and really that's how you win or lose at the game. And that is this fundamentally different thing about games that's also a really nice mesh with what's really modern about what we would like kids to understand. And that's where, for me, like getting involved in this has been really exciting. Like all the rules and systems of understanding that we bring as game designers, applying that into methods of learning.
And I think that touches really well on in terms of how children and students are learning today, actually, regardless of whatever age range that we're talking about. So we're talking about games that now aren't just summative. So at the end of the day, when you've memorized or understood a certain set of material, you're tested. Now it's a little bit more iterative, a little bit more focused on the communication and relationships. So and a lot of that can be very complex and very daunting. So what are the fears that are often associated with bringing video games to the classroom, or even as a parent? How do you address some of those fears?
I'll go. I mean, I think so. One interesting thing that happened with our program with Minecraft over the past summer, I think a lot of you know that this game called Minecraft is this insane phenomenon that maybe even transcends video games or is redefining media or whatever. But that game is a very pervasive game, and a lot of people and parents and children know about it. But even over the summer when we were running these programs, at the end of our little camp program where we had people do different challenges that would be associated with some kind of production on the internet, we had parents coming up to us saying, like, wow, this was such an eye-opening thing to a medium we never understood. And I think just not understanding what people are kind of doing in games or what video games are is kind of a big barrier in that respect. And even in a game like Minecraft, that's probably one of the most, if not the most popular game out there that people really don't understand. That's and games are complex and these systems are very complex. So it's I can empathize, but like I feel like that's a really huge barrier. into, I don't know, bringing it not only just into the classroom, but just kind of like as a valid thing that people can do. That's, I don't know, from where I'm coming from, as someone who's actually not from the education space, but as like from a game space instead.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that point. I think one of the things educators have to do is make the learning that's happening in the game visible. So, you know, when students are immersed in a gaming experience, it's not as it's not as apparent to someone walking in the classroom what exactly kids are learning. If you walk in and the kids are all taking a quiz and they're all, you know, writing answers, and someone walking around, they see that the students are you know, in some way demonstrating their learning. So I think as you know, as innovators in this space, the job for us in many ways is to make that learning visible and to show in a way that parents and perhaps more traditional educators can understand that what's happening in the game and how it relates to really important either it's standards or curriculum. And so there definitely is a focus at GlassLab on making the learning visible through reporting to teachers about how gameplay actions are evidence of learning, as well as sharing that with students. And eventually we'd like to, you know, share that with parents. So I definitely understand what Timothy's saying.
I'll jump in here. I agree 100% with you, Liz, that we have to make the learning visible. But I guess the question is, what is the learning that we're focused on? Is it just the academics? And you know, you see somebody come into like a Minecraft camp, like Tim's Minecraft camp, and you see, you know, them maybe playing around, and you think, okay, they're not really learning that much. But you know, even if they are building something that are like the Roman Colosseum or something in history, or some math lesson inside Minecraft, it's hard to see that you know, they're learning other things besides just that academic content, and they're spending all this time. And so, sorry, Paul, if I'm jumping ahead in the questions, but what else are we teaching, or what else are they learning through these video game experiences?
If I can like add another question on top of that, this is actually a really interesting point you bring up. Is like, you know, when you look at someone playing a game, you ask yourself, what exactly are they doing that constitutes learning? And I kind of oriented that question towards another thing that is very gamey, but people kind of look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's totally okay, they're doing cool stuff there, which is sports. Which is like super interesting, I think, to think about, because when we push people to engage in sports or like engage in that competitive environment, we can say, okay, they're learning teamwork or collaboration and cooperation, and I'm like, well, that's just video games as well, you know, depending on the right video game. So again, it's like, you know, piling on top of that question, how it could just be, it would happen over the next couple of years where people kind of see that video games are naturally collaborative or build teamwork or, you know, learn how to deal with competition. But, you know, that's a very, I guess, complicated question if you want to think about exactly how we're going to harness that.
Yeah, Tim, actually, we've just been talking about that. Well, I don't want to say too much, but like we've definitely given a lot of thought to how we can build collaboration systems that are sort of unlike what you've seen in the past using video games, which could be really cool. And actually, I was just going to kind of pile on Liz. Like, we did a test yesterday afternoon. Liz did over at a school, and saw, I think, some really exciting outcomes through the data that we collected. Where and this actually goes to Randall's point. Like, it's not just. So this was with our Mars Generation 1, our new game about argumentation. And yes, we're collecting information about argumentation. Are they figuring that out? But we also have this separate reports page of, like, did they persist and retry when they messed up? And it flags if they do. And just seeing that actually come into action based on actual gameplay, which happened yesterday, is like so cool. And it almost makes me feel like when I looked at that report this morning, like I feel like I know these kids in a way, like I've never met them, but I feel like I know which ones were persisting and were retrying things that didn't go well. It was really, really cool, and I think we're just starting to just scratch the surface of the power of that, but we're onto something.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, I was at that playtest, and I was telling kids what achievements I was seeing on our dashboard, and it was really exciting for the kids to know that they sort of were getting credit for the things that they don't get credit for at school necessarily, or at least not yet. One of them was about being bold, and it's like, I'm bold. And I felt like, what was really interesting to me was just the students' reactions, that they were getting credit for this new kind of learning, and it was valid at school, because even though I wasn't the teacher, they sort of thought of me as like the teacher lady. The teacher lady was validating these things. So it was really exciting stuff.
Can you guys share a little bit more about what's on that dashboard? I can see that it's great if you could measure things like grit, persistence, collaboration. Do you have something in there about like how to measure creativity or innovation or resourcefulness, those kind of things? And like Liz mentioned, the kid being bold. How do you flag kids that take risks and that aren't afraid to? I mean, we all talk about encouraging or embracing failure, but it's a matter of the goal of that is to encourage more risk taking, right? To say it's okay to mess up, but you have to take these risks. You just can't, just learn like the rest, like the herd. But you got to step out and try new things. That's how you're going to learn. So back to your is it a dashboard that you can share or you can talk about? Sorry, Paul, if I'm taking over your.
I will say I'll let MJ talk a little bit about the score. A little bit about the scoring that makes up the dashboard. But and I could pull up a picture of it. I don't know if that would. I guess not. I'll pull up a picture of it. I just need to do a quick little edit because I want to cut out the student names on it, since this just happened yesterday, and be respectful to those students. But so give me a second on that. We'll do some live editing. But I guess what I wanted to say is the dashboards we're referring to are from playfully.org, which is a project that we're doing that brings reporting, this concept of making learning visible. It allows developers to connect with us and to use our learning reports. So while MJ talks more specifically about it, I'll try to get an image that removes student names.
Okay, so yeah, Randall, you asked like 7 questions. I would love to think that we're able to report on creativity, and that will come in time. But like, I'll give you an example. So we always start with this philosophy that games, at least good games, are actually already good for kids, and that the things they're doing in the games are actually valuable. So you guys, like Tim, you seem like you probably played a lot of games, and you've played that game where you collected everything, right? You collected all of the Pokemon, or you collected every item or every object.
You'd make the spreadsheet to know where you're going to collect the Pokemon, right?
Exactly. You've opened up your game FAQs or whatever and done that. So and you feel really proud of it. You feel like, I did something, man. That was big. And what we did, that doesn't even have to be complicated. Is we looked at within the Mars Generation 1 game, did you do that? Or did you do that for at least one of the missions? And if so, let's report that out and give you credit for that. And say you are a persistent person, you are a focused person, you pulled that off. And so actually when Liz shows the reports, you're going to see one of the columns is that, right? And just as a person who's played a lot of games in my life, like, I want all credit for all that work that I did in all those games. And I want somebody to acknowledge that when I did so, it was hard work, and that I had to really stick with it, or go create a spreadsheet or find someone else's spreadsheet or whatever I needed to do. To me, as a person coming from the world of games, like, this is exciting, and it's telling kids that when they make these investments in what we would today call 21st century skills, that we're going to value that, and we're going to find a way to discover it and report it back to the people in your life.
Totally agree. I mean, it's also interesting to look at to kind of address skepticism, stuff that not only happens in the game but outside of the game. So kind of what I alluded to is like the spreadsheeting. There's like a really great. I had to pull this chapter up because it's like my favorite chapter in the Games Learning Society book, but it's the theory crafting chapter. This is probably a bit too deep for, like, telling people about like kind of the base level about what's happening in games. But it's called Theory Crafting: The Art and Science of Using Numbers to Interpret the World by Trina, I think, Truentenham and Bonnie Nardi. But it basically talks about all the spreadsheeting and like calculations that people put in a game like World of Warcraft, right? And when you see these spreadsheets, they're not like really simple stuff. They're like insane. Like I would never want to do this. It looks like work, but like people are doing this in like really deep levels of games to really crank out that advantage or like collect everything or do what they want. And that part of gaming actually interests me a ton. Is not only how can we design games that focus on learning, but how can they support all these other activities outside of games that people would look at and be like, I instantly get it. Like there's a lot of maybe work going into playing this thing or learning about this thing that they're really passionate about. So
yeah. So just following up on your point about like all of the calculations that are happening behind the scenes, I think what's really nice and compelling to show here is just that here's a really so the audience for this is as the teacher at this point, and it also could be shared with parents. We don't presently have access in that way, but a teacher could print it out, is what I'm saying, or email it to a parent. And I think what is so great is there is some work quite a bit of work that goes into making these calculations. But here's a really simple report that any teacher could read to know which students are achieving against some of these 21st century skills. There's actually more achievements in the game. I just took a quick snapshot of the first screen. And it's making it visible and it's making it simple. And then, and of course, along those lines, it's giving information that's useful for educators to actually make instructional decisions. Because you don't want just data for data's sake. You want information that's actually going to help the teacher further instruction or deepen learning. And so that's really what we're trying to accomplish. We're still working on it. We're constantly getting feedback on the reports that we're making, trying to really make sure that teachers will use this information and they'll use it to teach, even in a more engaging way, or in a way that really captures students' interest. So it's they're not reports just for report's sake. At least we hope they're not. If they are, then we have a lot more work to do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Liz. What does it say under bold there?
It says student is taking the initiative to change positions at difficult times in order to make a better argument. Again, the game was about argumentation and reason thinking, and so that was what we're using as the description for bold in this context.
Yeah, I really like the concept of this type of dashboard, and that it can show that there is more learning than just the academic stuff that's in the game, which is very valuable today, especially with the lack of character that we see in like places like the NFL and other places. So, I mean, character education is something that we need to teach, but how do we effectively teach that? I read a report today about on the KIPP schools and their character education report card program, and the effectiveness of that. And the report said that the KIPP schools, they emphasize this character education. They have character report cards, but the result of the study was that it did boost their academic performance, but in terms of character with a like control set, it didn't really make a significant difference in their character education. It made a big difference in their academics, interestingly, which was the main goal. But as for character, the author thought maybe there's other methods to more effectively teach character education. And one particular method that would be effective, I think, is these games, because they are so immersive in that they have this opportunity to teach all these different character skills, including being bold and innovative and creative, and which is a really big thing and a really big need in school.
That's a really great point as well. So you've all touched to a certain degree on how video games can be used for learning in ways that they really weren't perceived as being feasible or possible before. What are some of the video games that you've seen that have been used for that purpose? So aside from with GlassLab games, with Minecraft, as well as any other games that you've played and experienced with students and with adults. How have they been used, and what are some of the observations you found to be very interesting?
I think particularly with games that deal with virtual worlds, so like you inhabit some kind of avatar and you collaboratively have to inhabit this world with like other people, those worlds I feel do a pretty good job of at least making you aware that another person kind of exists on the other side of the screen. You kind of have to treat them differently. At least with our Camp Minecraft program, we had a couple like moments where people had to learn to kind of acknowledge that someone else behind this virtual character was a person, and they have feelings, and they have, they don't like it when you take their stuff and things like that. But people would get like legitimately upset when things wouldn't go their way. And I mean, it's an interesting notion, at least from a game design perspective, is that there are a lot of people who aren't used to multiplayer, or that idea of multiplayer, like playing with other people online. But then through like kind of getting used to that world, they have to learn to kind of empathize with all the other players that they're inhabiting the world with, which was kind of like a very interesting thing for me to see over the summer as someone who's been used to multiplayer all my life. That you could connect with someone else over the internet, not just like as a video hangout where you see their human face, or typing to them on the forum, but you're interacting with them in a way that you normally wouldn't, and you have to kind of learn, to just accept them as a person and not just as someone who's only out there to get you and ruin your experience. Was interesting to watch. Some people do that. That's really messed up though.
Do you so in terms of those experiences, and you brought up an interesting point, and I know that we've talked about StarCraft to a certain degree as well. Do you feel like this sort of cooperative gameplay or this medium lends itself to critical thinking and like strategy building? Do you feel like in your own personal experiences, do you feel like the ability to build a strategy in real time and make changes really quickly and effectively has improved as a result of your experiences or how other people have played games as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are like kind of two ideas here. One is like the collaborative gameplay and the competitive gameplay. So StarCraft is a competitive game. I think people understand it when you say it's more akin to real-time chess. There's just a lot of stuff going on at once, and you have to think a lot before you make each move. So that's kind of where the out-of-game collaboration comes in. It's like you want to talk to your friends of like, what's the best strategy? What are you doing? How are you winning? How are you losing? And you bring it into the game, and then there you're kind of isolated against someone in a 1 versus 1 environment. But in the same respect with any competitive medium, you kind of have to learn to lose gracefully or just lose a lot. Like I think something in the StarCraft community that people say is like just lose the first 100 games. Like losing is a goal in competitive games. It's like just lose your first 100 games because that's how you're going to learn the fastest. And it definitely at least helped shape my own like way to perceive how to approach something. Is just like fail really fast at something that you really want to get good at. And I think through the interviews we did with the previous StarCraft research, that held true to a lot of other people. Is like people who are really hardcore StarCraft fanatics would say, yeah, I just love to lose at this game whenever I get the chance because it's a great learning opportunity. But I love to win as well. I think a really big point of tension there is it feels really awful to lose. Like it still sucks to lose like all the time. And that's not for everybody. Like I just come to learn that not everyone likes to go through those experiences, and developing some way to kind of say it's okay to lose or it feels worse to lose, I think is a goal for a lot of game designers. But at the same time, it is a part of the experience, and sometimes it isn't for everyone, which is the unfortunate part, or the part that we need to overcome. I think that also lends itself to a lot of the skepticism as well. It's like when you lose, you're like, oh, I know this is good for me, but this is awful, and I don't want to do it again because I just feel awful. So.
Yeah, actually, Tim, there's some interesting data that, so I'm from my past life when I worked at Electronic Arts, and we did some studies on people playing sports games, and discovered that the people who were most likely to continue playing were those that actually split their winning and losing 50-50.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so you intuitively might say, well, the people who win a lot are the ones that want to keep playing, but in fact, people need to lose relatively often to continue to be interested. So it's very interesting.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think games now who do automated matchmaking, that what that means is the game assigns you like a skill ranking, and then they assign the whole population of players a skill ranking, and it does its best to match you with people who are better, like around the same range as you, to keep that 50-50. That's really interesting. I think it's also interesting to see that these skill ranking systems also rank you with people who are better than you. So like they kind of like, you know, stack the deck against you. It's like you might lose, but if you win, that means you're improving, right? I think that's also a really interesting element that is being built into games, is like being paired up with someone who is better than you, who may, you know, completely trash you at the game, but it's kind of a way to tell you that, oh, you're getting matched up with someone better, you might be improving, so keep at it. But again, like the balance between winning and losing, that's really a key part, I feel, and also really interesting.
Yeah, that's how games keep you in that flow state, right? Trying to match you up with somebody just a little bit better than you.
Exactly.
Something else that games could do also, I mean that if you lose every time, you're going to get discouraged. But if you lose and you've got a strategy about how to get better the next time, as long as you've got that little strategy, oh, I can do this a little bit better. Maybe the game could give feedback on, oh, you could have positioned this a little better, you could have used the spell a little bit better. Some hints about what to do better, maybe a dashboard for yourself about that game, and then you can go back and improve on that. So as long as you got that optimism that you can get better the next time, then losing's not so bad. It's actually kind of a good thing then.
Yeah, the feedback in that area is like insanely important, I feel, because people get the most frustrated when they kind of have to make up the reasons in their head, and sometimes the reasons aren't really valid. I mean, you know, you're frustrated and it's understandable, but like that's where active feedback from the game is really valuable. Not all games give that. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, and also that's kind of where, if it's a multiplayer game and you're working as a team, that's where the opportunity for a lot of the social emotional learning can come in. So how to deal with your teammates, how to not make excuses that it's not your fault, it's their fault. How do you have more self-control, and how do you have empathy for your teammates? So, you know, games can be really good at that.
Yep.
So in terms of how you're building gameplay and then doing playing it in a way that is really useful, especially in the classroom, when you're talking to parents as well about like how these games, not necessarily made for learning, are providing learning opportunities, what are the other ways in which parents can get involved, or how they can get to know how the game works better, and how to also engage with it with their kids?
That's a tough question about parents, because a lot of parents, they don't actually play the game. They won't even sit down for 10 minutes to play the game. And so it's hard to describe what the game is without them actually going in and playing it. So if you can design some kind of learning experience, maybe you're a lesson plan that you have to work with a parent, and the parent has to get in there in order to complete that lesson, then maybe, you know, it'll motivate that parent to actually get into Minecraft or whatever it is, and then say, oh, okay, and this is what it's all about. Because I think that's a big step, just to get the parents some experience in actual gaming.
Yeah, and just thinking about it from an educator's perspective, I recently was working with a group of educators on some concepts around a new game, and we were really talking about what were the barriers to acceptance. And they sort of broke it down for me into like 3 things game developers have to do to win the hearts and minds of teachers and kids, and then ultimately parents as well. And the first thing was this concept that we already discussed about reports that say to make that learning visible. So we covered that. The second thing was just, especially teachers are accountable for their students' learning. I mean, we can't escape the pressures that the teachers face, and so making sure that these games, that the connection to whether it's the standards or curriculum that teachers are accountable for in their classrooms, that games address it, and that there's a clear communication on that, on the connection that's being made by using the game. The third most important thing, they're actually not in order of important, but the third thing they told me was that kids have to love the game. You don't want to put anything new into your classroom that kids aren't just totally psyched about, because there's no point. So you have to make sure the game is fun so that kids, so that there's no engagement problems. Like that is critically important. And teachers won't change their practice unless it makes their lives easier. And most of the time, the definition of life easier is that kids like something, that kids are excited, that kids are fully embracing the learning experience. That's usually what making a teacher's life easier is all about, is that that learning is happening. And so I would say that a teacher isn't going to take something out that they've used forever and ever unless it's really worth it. The kids are loving it, and then it meets the other two criteria that I mentioned before.
Okay, so in terms of, you brought up an interesting point about how we don't necessarily want to replace any existing tools that they have in the classroom, any existing curriculum, and that video games are a channel with which there can just be increased engagement especially since students now have increased digital literacy, have different ways in which they engage with each other. So in terms of other anecdotes or other thoughts you have on how games can evolve over time, say not just in terms of, say, reporting, but in terms of critical thinking skills or forms of gameplay that you would be interested in seeing later on, do you have any thoughts or inspiration of what you would like to see next?
I do. I'd like to see, well, I'm a big proponent of transmedia, and so I think that transmedia is one of the best ways we can teach our kids just literacy skills. And you see kids, well, I see adults, in front of the TV with an iPad, with their phone, with all this and everything going on at once, and they're consuming and creating all this kind of media. And so these transmedia games, like ARGs and other transmedia games that are coming out, they're ideal for teaching these literacy skills. So you've got games like Ingress and others that are kind of digital games, but semi-transmedia games too. But I think if we see a melding of all these different media together, including digital games as one of them, maybe as a leading of, maybe as the center of it, and you've got all these other media going on telling a complete story in a complete world, then you've got some huge learning experience. And who knows, maybe someday that can take over a whole classroom and be a course in itself. So that's kind of a future thought. But I think just a digital game, just on your computer, just on one piece of hardware, maybe trying to expand beyond that to include other media. What do you guys think?
I think that's super interesting because at least the way I look at it, certain games, if you extend the scope at which you observe them, they are kind of in a way all transmedia. You know what I mean? A lot of stuff from the game world overflows to the real world. I have very little experience with actual transmedia games. I have Ingress on my phone, but I'm not walking. For those of you who don't know, Ingress is a game where you actually have to use your GPS on your phone. You walk around in the real world and you collect it's kind of points towards your faction. Then you capture points for your faction that's represented in the game. But I've seen a lot of games I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's some RPG add-on to the classroom where kids not only get points, but their points level up their digital avatar in the game, and things like that. I haven't really explored, but I've found like really interesting because you're right. It's like not really a game you engage with, but it augments your experience instead of like kind of encapsulates it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, in a way, it would be impossible to consider Minecraft without YouTube.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the two are actually kind of go hand in hand. And of course, if you've been paying any attention to like how much money just got paid for Twitch TV, which again is like it's this transmedia experience of games, right? It's definitely a huge part of what goes on just in game culture. And you know, I wouldn't say that I have great ideas of exactly how we want to bring that out in educational software yet. But one of the things that we really see is that a game learning experience is a huge conversation starter. So there's something about having experienced this idea rather than just read about it or being told about it that makes everyone, kids and adults, want to talk about it. Oh, I tried this. Did you try that? Oh, did you? Oh, how did that work out? You know, so they have these kind of conversations around the subject are like this huge opportunity that I think when you think of Randall's idea of transmedia, yeah, of course kids want to share this out. They want to write about their experience because it's their experience. It's not something that they just read about.
Yep. I think the Twitch thing is actually real interesting because that's been my world actually for the past like couple of years. Is at least like I said earlier, the way I think about it, games right now are all kind of some kind of transmedia experience. I guess that's like the cop-out answer is like all games are a transmedia experience if you really scope it out to that length. But it's very true. Like I'm just really excited about that chapter in the Games Learning Society book that all this production that's happening with games is like it's really like the game is only one component of kind of this whole community and ecosystem. Like even game developers now are building streaming into their game platform so people can capture video and share it out, and they encourage people to engage in these things that aren't necessarily the game itself, but like this community of video and forums and things in social media outside the game. So I guess an interesting thing to think about when we think about games and learning, it's like games plus community plus learning, you know, everything around the game, not just the game itself for design.
And there is a very large community from education and video games who are interested in interacting with each other now, and it's growing in conversation day by day. So we have a question from Catherine on Google+. What would be some way, what are some recommendations in which educators who might not necessarily be comfortable with video games, don't necessarily know how to use them, but are interested in engaging, how could they start, or how can they get more involved in the community?
Well, I think the first thing I would recommend is that teachers talk to the experts they know, and in this case, experts are their students. And my first recommendation would be to have teachers go to their students. I've definitely heard this theme with Minecraft in the past, that teachers were introduced to it by their students and then had to learn the game with their students. And so I think that's a great way to start and get comfortable with it. And students, of course, will look forward to being teachers themselves and to sharing their knowledge. So that would be a very concrete thing, because there's, depending on who the teacher is, there could be anywhere from 30 to 120 experts right there at their fingertips. Another thing I would just say is that sometimes teachers don't consider themselves gamers, but they're playing games on their phones, and they're like, I'm not a gamer, but I play Words with Friends, Plants vs. They list all these things they are doing, and I think that's another thing, is just making sure that the definition of game is big. And in many ways, teachers can think about the games that they are playing themselves and how what kind of learning they, as learning experts, can draw out of the game. Others probably have very concrete resources that they can cite, but I wanted just to give it up to all the students out there as game experts.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, asking your students. Another thing I would do if I'm a teacher that is not very video game savvy or tech savvy is play non-digital games with your kids first. Just play board games or card games or something. Just get the idea of playing a game that's a traditional entertainment game and using it in the classroom to teach something. And then start there, and then gradually make your way to digital games. So just get the idea of gaming and learning in their heads first, just to get them to think more like a gamer. I think that's a big hurdle, is that educators they have a different mindset than kids, because the kids have this gaming mindset and teachers have this traditional mindset. So crossing over that hurdle is a big thing.
Yeah, I would just second that, Randall, about using non-digital games. I've actually taught game design at the collegiate level, and we always start with non-digital games as part of, like, this is actually what game literacy looks like, is we start with understanding how those games work, and then we go on to digital later. But there's so many great, if you were to take, like you said, a popular available board game, have kids play it and then ask the kids to modify it, to talk about some subject or whatever. Like, that's a great activity for all those sort of advanced systems thinking stuff that we like. It would be a great way to start.
And so for ways to engage outside of the classroom, so when you're engaging in these discussions, and you've all raised points of, like, there are many different ways to kind of get into the gamer mindset, and even beyond the term of the gamer, everybody just learns a different way, and how they show those learnings and how they're developing their own understanding, manifests in different ways. So even outside of the classroom, when you're going out. Say you're waiting at a bus stop with your kid, or you're in public transit, just waiting around. Are there any other ways in which you have seen these types of gaming and learning in your lives? Is there anything applicable to how you can develop like a competency or an understanding of gaming in that space?
I'll jump in again, if that's okay. I have I'm big on this game. I call it a gameful mindset, to have the mindset of a gamer, and I think that if you have a gameful mindset, it pervades through every part of your life. So if you're waiting at a bus stop, maybe you're counting the number of red cars that go by, versus you have a stranger there counting the number of yellow cars or something. Like, you make something into a game, but you make everything into like a game-like experience. I do this thing brushing my teeth. I try to stand on one leg, balance myself on one leg for like a minute, trying to brush my teeth till the thing goes off, and then try to go on the other leg. So it's a challenge to take this tedious task of brushing my teeth and turning it into something like a game. So this kind of gameful mindset, it kind of pervades our whole way of thinking, our whole life. And I think that's the difference between teachers and students today, is that they can't understand where the kids are coming from. Kids need this constant feedback. They need these constant challenges. They need these goals, and sometimes and oftentimes the teaching or the curriculum doesn't give it to them. So games are really good at that. So that it's this whole notion of a gameful mindset that I think is a big thing. Any comments?
Yeah, I love that term. I often I like to say all the world's a game, just to sort of tweak Shakespeare a little bit to what I think is more modern. Like I remember having a great lecture recently about that whole thing where they closed off the toll booths at the bridge in New Jersey, which was all this big political thing. And in fact, if you break it down, you can see that you had a bunch of people playing a game with each other. And that the strategies that they were using and the feedback they were getting, which in some cases didn't work out like they thought it would, could really be interpreted as a bunch of game mechanics. And isn't that a really interesting way to look at the whole world around you? Of like, everything has these dynamic bits that play back and forth amongst each other, and it's a way of understanding. Kind of like what I was saying way back at the beginning. It's a type of literacy for understanding the world around us as systems. And when you start think of things as games, those systems become more transparent, and you can kind of see through how they work.
Well, we have about 8 minutes until the top of the hour. If anybody has any last-minute questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us on Google Plus or Twitter using #ConnectedLearning. I'd like to give everyone the opportunity to provide any closing thoughts or any sort of moments of inspiration they had during this webinar. MJ, would you like to start?
I just, I hear more and more just during the 2 years and a little bit that we've been doing GlassLab, it feels like the conversation on this topic of use of games in classrooms has shifted from I don't know if that's a good idea to I want to know how to implement it. And to me, that's really exciting. It means that the opportunities are really big and that there's a lot of open-mindedness in the system right now.
Liz, what are your thoughts?
I guess I was just going to say that I came into GlassLab not considering I didn't consider myself a gamer, and I learned very quickly that I had a gameful mindset, and that if I were to go back in the classroom, which is still a possibility for me, that I would absolutely embrace games, but I would be the first to need tutoring from my students. And the other thing I guess I want to say is, when GlassLab is working, especially on things like dashboards, we try as much as we can to be mindful of teachers' experience, and there's all different kinds of teachers. There's not just one persona for teachers. So if there's anyone on this listening to us today who wants to help us and give feedback on the kind of reporting that we're doing, because we don't want a one size fits all kind of thing, please connect with us at glasslabgames.org, and you can be part of the conversation with us and part of the design team, in a sense, to make sure that as we make learning visible, that educators are part of crafting what that means. So that's my last little thing to contribute.
Thank you, Liz. And so we have one more question from a parent, Vivian, on Twitter, and perhaps for you two, something to chew on, not necessarily have like a final answer. But how do we move beyond the constant concern of video games and screen time and sitting in front of a screen, not directly interacting or having difficulties with the digital medium, despite the fact that we know that games have the potential to be educational? How can we address that?
I guess I could take a stab at that. Is the question for kids or for us? I mean, because it's a problem for us too, I think. That here we're in front of a screen for an hour here. So for kids, though, there are studies that X amount of screen time is detrimental. So you do have to watch. You can't have your kid playing Minecraft for like 6 hours straight or something, or playing up till 3 in the morning. Even though they'll do that, but how can you encourage them to break away from that? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that, but maybe game designers do have the answers that maybe it limits the time after, cuts you off after a certain amount of time, or it makes you take a break. You're supposed to take a break every half an hour or so and stretch your eyes. So I do these eye exercises every half an hour to try to look away from the screen. But maybe it can be designed into games, or if it's a learning game especially, maybe it can be designed into that you need to take breaks. Tim,
I'm going to go with the cop-out non-answer that, again, it's like you have to treat games kind of like any other medium. It's like, would you limit time on a book and a movie? And you actually would, right? Like, you don't want someone to sit reading a book for 12 hours a day. You don't want people watching movies for 24 hours at a time. Same with games. The thing interesting you bring up is, like, there was a recent study featured on a gaming blog called Polygon about, this amount of games daily is good and this amount less than these hours is bad, and more hours. I personally am always very skeptical of those things, only because games are very diverse. Like, we're all here talking about games as one thing, but like we were saying earlier, people play things like Words with Friends, Angry Birds, or mobile games, and there are people who play things like Minecraft, and there are hardcore people who play games like World of Warcraft or StarCraft. Like, all those games take a different amount of time to engage with. Like, you would never sit down and play World of Warcraft for 5 minutes. You would get nothing done. You can totally play Words with Friends like asynchronously for 5 minutes. So it is a hard question to tackle, but I think we can all take comfort in the fact that it is a hard question. Like, if you don't have the answer, that's like quite okay. Just like in games, if you don't have the answer, that's quite okay. Everyone's figuring it out. And I've had friends who are, game developers, software developers, like any kind of, they work in different fields, even professional gamers who had very different experiences growing up. Some people had like 1 hour a weekend for like a week, and some people played for 24 hours. Like, it's just a different experience we all have to tackle face on. I'm pushing for the fact that there is kind of no right answer, and I don't think there ever will be in that respect. Might be a bit scary because people want the answer, but in truth, tell me what the screen time is on books, and then I'll tell you what the screen time is on games, and then we'll have our answer.
Well, I mean, that's a great way to close, I think. I mean, that'll certainly inspire and provoke people to kind of find ways to explore that answer. Thank you, everyone, for having such an amazing conversation. To the audience, we'll have a full video of this recording available immediately on www.connectedlearning.tv, as well as with other curated content on the way that you can share with your network. This wraps up the second webinar of our month-long series, but that doesn't mean the conversations have to end there. We encourage everyone to keep the energy going and keep the conversations going using the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning, and by getting involved in our ongoing conversations within the Connected Learning Google+ community. If you're interested about upcoming webinars as well as other Connected Learning highlights, visit www.connectedlearning.tv and signing up for the email newsletter. We hope to see you online next Thursday, September 25th at the same time, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll be discussing what design characteristics video games make video games more inspiring or motivated for engaged learning. Thank you again, everyone.